Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring the third video of the series where I teach you guys how to build a CRUD using GraphQL, TypeScript, React, all the kind of technologies that we've been using. And in this video, we're actually going to start by implementing our front end. So we've focused primarily on the backend, and we've practically created everything in our backend. However, we still need to create our React front end, which is going to make all the requests to our GraphQL server so that we actually have a full experience, a full stack project. So you can see I actually already created my React application, and all my files are in TypeScript. They are all automatically created in TSX. So how I did this is basically I opened here my terminal and I just ran the command line. So for example, I would come over here and I would run yarn create, let me just push this over here, yarn create react app, then a dot saying that I wanted to create inside of the client folder, and then I would run template like this and TypeScript. And this will create a TypeScript template into your project. I won't do this again because I already did it. And obviously, if you're using npm, just write npx create react app and the same flag that we used in this that I just showed you guys. So let me close this. You can see we have here our application, and every React application, I'm just gonna delete all the unnecessary files. So for example, I'm gonna delete the app.test, the index.css, the logo, and the setup tests. So those four I'm going to delete, and then I'm going to come here to my index.tsx. I'm going to remove the import of my index.css from here. Then I'm just going to come here to my CSS, and I'm going to delete all the stuff that already came with our CSS file. And then finally, we're going to come here to our app.tsx, and we're going to delete everything, like literally everything. So we won't be focusing that much, and you can see right now that this is our project. It's just an empty page, as you can see, but we won't be focusing a lot on UI. We will be focusing mostly on how to set up GraphQL and into your React application, and also how to make all the requests work. So I won't be working a lot with CSS, and I hope you guys don't mind that. So basically, you can see here we have our app.tsx file, but how do we actually connect to our GraphQL server? If you're used to using REST, you probably would imagine that you would do something like either use the fetch API or use Axios, something like that, try to reach for an endpoint and receive the data back, right? But that's not how GraphQL works, because think about this, we only have one endpoint, and what query we're trying to make depends completely on how GraphQL works, right? So we definitely need to use a library in our favor, and we're going to install this library right now. So I'm going to open up here my terminal, and I'm going to install two things. Let me just clear this. I'm going to change my directory into my client folder, and then now that I'm inside of my client folder, I'm just going to add yarn add at Apollo client. So this is the library we're going to use. It's version 3 of Apollo client. It is basically a library which allows us to connect our front end in React to a GraphQL server. So what else do we need to add? I believe we need to add GraphQL as well. So let's just add both of them. And yeah, I think that's basically it. I'll press enter. And while it's installing, let's actually already start building our connection in our React application. So what do we want to do? We actually want to import stuff at the top here. So what do we want to import? From at Apollo client, we want to import some very simple stuff. We want to import Apollo client, literally like this, Apollo client. Then we want to import in-memory cache, and I'll explain what each of these things mean. And then, yeah, no, actually for now we'll probably just need this, and also Apollo provider, yeah. Apollo provider. So those are the three that we need, and the reason why we need those is because what happens is we need to know where in our application we will have access to our GraphQL server, right? Where can we make requests to our GraphQL server? So what you do is you go to your outermost component in your project, which usually is the app.tsx or the index.tsx, and you basically wrap everything around a provider, similar to using something like the context API, and inside of it you can have access to all you can have access to make requests to the server that you define in that provider. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to actually come over here and create something called a client, which would basically be a new Apollo client. And this is something that you need to create to basically establish the connection. And it's just a very simple object containing two pieces of information. One of them is the URI, which is the link to your GraphQL server, which in our case, if you recall, we are running our server in the local host 3001, like this, /GraphQL, obviously. And then we also need to determine the cache. So cache, for now, like since it's a beginner video, it definitely isn't important. It's more important later. So you can just determine it to be in-memory cache, because you wouldn't need to worry about it. So we just created our client over here, and since we put the URI to be our API or our GraphQL server, it already knows what we need to request, right? So this is basically just establishing the connection. And now all we have to do is we actually need to come over here, and on the outermost layer of our component, we need to pass an Apollo provider like this. And like at the top here, we need to pass a client inside of this Apollo provider, and a client, the client that we created inside of here. So what exactly does this do? Oh yeah, and we also need to pass some children inside of here. So I'm just gonna put like a random div. So basically, this over here just tells that whatever is inside of this will have access to making the requests to our GraphQL server established by this client. In our case, is this GraphQL server right here, the one that we created. Which, by the way, so we can test stuff, we're gonna run that at the same time. I'm running React on the port 3000, but we're also gonna run the API on port 3001. So now that we have this, let's actually take a look at our page. I'm gonna open this up a bit like this, just so that we can see it as we're doing it. But we're not gonna focus that much on UI, as I mentioned. What I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna create some simple, I'm gonna say like a simple forms, right? Because let's think about this. What are the queries and the mutations that we created? So for mutations, we basically created a create user, and update password, and a delete user, right? So we have to find a way to create users. We also need to find a way to create a form so that a person can update their password, and also maybe put a button where you can delete a user, right? So let's do that. You can see that to create a user, you need to pass a name, a username, and a password. So what we can do is in our app.tsx, we can create 3 inputs over here. I'm going to create a div, pass that class name of I don't know, something like create user. Inside of here, we're going to put 3 inputs and a button. So one input will be the input for the name. So let me make it of type text, and I'll just copy it 3 times so that we don't have to waste time. So 3 times, and at the bottom we can just put a button like this, and this will be create user. And as you can see, it obviously looks ugly, but it's over here. And let me just put some placeholders so we know what we're which one of them we're talking about. So like the first one is name, username, and password. Okay, so name, then let me just grab this, paste it over here, username, and password. So now that we have created this 3 inputs, we need to actually make something so that we're able to grab whatever we're writing in our inputs. And there's different ways of doing this, but since this is a kind of a beginner's video, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to create 3 states, one for username, one for name, and one for password, and I'm going to update them as you write in your input, because I feel like that's the simplest way of doing it initially. So to do that, we actually need to import useState from React, as you can see right here. And we can come here to our function app, and right at the top, above where we define the client, we can just say const equal to use state, and pass, it's going to be a string, so we need a name, which takes a function called setName. And let me just copy and paste this, because we're going to use them more. So we need a username, and we need to set username like this, and then for password, so password and set password like this, password. Okay, so now that we have the three states that we want to represent whatever we're writing over here, we can very simply come to each of the inputs and just give them an onChange event. So basically, when there's any changes in the inputs, we want to grab the event like this, and I'll just call it event. And then I'm going to, inside of this function, say set name equal to event dot target dot value, like this. So obviously it's not checking for TypeScript like types right now, because that's how the template initially starts with. But if you want to check for strictly check for if your types are working, you can definitely add that in your configuration files. The reason for this is, oh, I accidentally opened my node modules. Let me just close it. And then for this one, we need to change this to set username. And then finally for password, we need to change this to set password. And now we have our inputs being correct. Like whenever we write on this input, we're grabbing whatever you wrote on it, and we're going to set them to the states that we defined at the top here. So now what do? We have our our inputs, our form done. We have established a connection to GraphQL, to our server. But how do we write our queries? How do we actually determine which query or which mutation we're trying to reach? Well, to do that, we actually need to create a separate folder. Like, we don't need to, but I usually like to organize it this way. I want to create a separate folder called GraphQL. And I'm going to open this up a bit because we're not going to be looking that much on the screen right now. And then inside of this folder, we're going to keep all of our mutations and all of our queries that we like written, right? So you can organize your folder structure however you want, but for now I'll just create a mutation.ts and queries.ts. Two separate folders, files, one for queries and one for mutations. And the one for mutations is actually the one we're going to focus right now. What we do is at the top, we can import something from the Apollo client library called GQL, which means basically GraphQL. And it allows us to write some queries similar to how we were writing in our graphical interface when we were testing our API. But instead, we're going to write it here in our React application, right? So let's export a constant, which is going to be our query, and let's call it something like create user. And similar to what we did before, I usually like to call them with capital letters. That's also kind of a standard in the GraphQL community, so I recommend doing it like this as well. And then we're going to write GQL, and don't forget, we're using the backticks over here. You need to put them despite it being super annoying, and I agree with you, but it's really annoying to use backticks. However, you need to put all of your query, like all of your mutation and all of your query inside of two backticks, as you can see. So inside of here, we basically can just write a mutation. So what is the format of a mutation? Well, the first thing you need to write is mutation, then the name of the function which you're like for your mutation. And if you recall, the name of this function, let me just open here the server. It's actually on the index.ts. So we called it create user like this. So let's just come over here and say create user. And then we need to open parentheses. And then we need to basically define all the arguments that this mutation takes, right? So it takes a name, and you need to use the $sign for this. So you use a name, which has a type string. And by the way, if you're interested in learning about GraphQL types, you need to use them right here. So for example, a string, you need to define it like this with a capital S and a exclamation mark. Then what else we need? We need how can I say? We need a username, which also is of type string, and we need a password, which is also of type string, right? So now we defined all the types, and we can open and close similar to how we would with a function, curly braces, right? And inside of here, we need to write the function name again, create user. But now, inside of this parentheses, you actually put the name of the argument, so like name, and you just say that you want to reference this name to the variable that you created above here. So I know it's weird, it's super weird. I don't know why they make us do it twice, but this is how it works. We just come over here and say, again, username is equal to username, something like this. and password is equal to password. And I recommend like after each one of them, you actually don't do it like this. You actually put them like each on each line, as you can see right here, because it just looks better. It looks more organized. So I'm gonna do it like this, and let me just do it for those as well. Actually, this needs to be. Oh no, actually this can be over here. Over here, and then username as well and password. Okay, so basically this is how we're going to structure our mutation. And then right after this, we can finally come over here and determine what we want to get back from this mutation. If you recall, for a mutation, we decided to give it a type of, let's see, give it a type of, actually for create user, we're returning the user. So that's fine. We can just return something like the ID. We can ask for the ID. We can ask for the name, the username, something like this, right? We can ask for whatever we want. So these are the three things that we're asking. And when I save it, it automatically goes, but I won't be. I'm using Prettier, so that's why it automatically changed back. But if you're not using Prettier, then just leave it that way I was showing, right? So now that we created this mutation, we are exporting it to external files if we try to import it. So we can just come here to our app.tsx and let's import it at the top. Let's go over here and say import from ./GraphQL/mutation, and let's import create user. So now that we have imported our mutation, how do we actually tell our application to make a request to our server to execute the mutation? Well, we can actually import a hook from Apollo client called useMutation, which is really nice. It is the hook you use whenever you want to make a mutation. So inside of here, inside of our app component, we can just call this hook by coming here and saying something like const, then passing a name of the function that for the mutation, which in our case is create user, like this. Then grabbing something from this request. You can get the data, you can get errors. So I'm just gonna get, if there's any errors, I want to see them. And you set this equal to use mutation, and then you just put here the name of the mutation you're creating, right? So I'm gonna say create user. This is the mutation we just imported at the top. And like coming back here, the two arguments you pass in this array, the first one is the function you want to call whenever you want to make this mutation. So if I come somewhere here in my project and I just call create user like this, it's gonna execute the mutation. And then error is just if there's any errors in our request. We can actually get more from this. We can get the data, we can get if the request is loading, we can get many pieces of information. But for now, I only care that much about the actual, like if there's any errors, but you can definitely work around with that. Now, what do we do, right? We have our create user function, and we have a button that is supposed to submit our user, right? So what do we do? Well, we can come inside of here, and we can actually call this on-click functionality, and inside of here, we can just call a function which calls the create user function and passes the arguments inside of here. So basically, we want to pass different variables, like we want to pass a name, we want to pass a username, and we want to pass a password. So we can come inside of here and say variables equals to name, and then name will be equal to the state we have called name. Then we pass username, and username will be equal to the state we have called username, and then password, which again will be equal to password, like this. And this, obviously, you can rewrite this logic like not inside of the not using inline statements, but I'm just gonna keep it simple. You can see when you click on this button, it calls the create user function, and we pass as variables the name, the username, and the password. This is what we're doing right here. So now we can actually test to see if this is working. I'm gonna open up here my apparently we have some TypeScript errors. Okay guys, so the error is gone. I actually deleted the queries file. We're gonna create it again, but it's just because it was giving some weird errors. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna come into my terminal, and I'm gonna go into my server folder, and I'm gonna run my server so that we have access to it. We have actually access to our database and everything. So I'm actually inside now of my server folder. I'm gonna run yarn dev. Now you can see that we have our server running on port 3001, and we can test that by coming here to our project, and you can see that our React has some issues which we're going to fix later, but Coming here to localhost 2001/GraphQL, you can clearly see that our server is running. But let's come over here and let's see what is happening. So I think the way to fix what is showing is we can just wrap our whole project around with an empty, with a fragment, an empty tag, so that it stops giving us errors. Oh, and before I actually forget, I'm actually going to divide this into some components. So for example, I'm going to open up here a new folder called components, and let's create a file called create_user.tsx over here, and we're just going to import, like, I'm going to do something like this, and it's going to import everything. And I'm just going to put all of our logic for creating the user inside of it, so that we don't have like a very crowded file in our app.tsx. So I'm just going to import the use state at the top here. And then what else do we need? I'm going to erase this. Then we need probably all of this UI that we have over here. So let's just put this at the top here, inside of this return statement over here. And then we need to import the create user, right? This over here. And then finally we need to import from Apollo client. So I'm just going to put this at the top here, and we're only importing the use mutation hook. So that's basically it for the components. Now actually where the create user mutation is in a different place, so we have to add another dot here to fix it. And now we have our actual thing running over here. Let me just delete this, and yeah, we need to now call this component over here by saying create user, and it automatically imports at the top, as you can see. Let me also delete this, and now it should be fine. You can see we have here our Apollo provider and our create user. So let's see what's happening. We made some mistakes here in our create user. Oh no, over here. Just need to press enter. And now you can see our project seems to be working. And our GraphQL server is also running over here. So you can see everything seems to be working. So what do we do now? When we click on create user, what should happen, like the button, what should happen is it should get all of the values that we wrote in our states, that we wrote in our inputs, and it should submit them to our mutation, which should be received in our server. Let's test this. Let's come over here, make a query. You guys know that we have a query called get all users. Get all users, and let's get every single users by name, username, and password, just so we can see who we have in our database right now. So we only have one person, which is PedroTech. Let's try to add another person. I'm gonna add, I don't know, James. Username will be James123. Password will be random password, like this. When we click create user, let's try to run this query again and see if James appears here. So when we run this query, you can see that James appears in our GraphQL server, meaning that we correctly connected our React application to our GraphQL backend. So that's working perfectly. You can see that our use mutation hook worked so that we could receive the data. However, if you want to also do some error handling, you can actually grab the error. You can do something like if error, like just ask if there's any errors. If the request returns any errors, you want to do something, which I'm not going to focus that much, but I just wanted to show how important this is when you're working with Apollo Client. I really recommend, since Apollo Client provides you with so many different pieces of information, I recommend you going over which ones you might want to have and might want to use in your application, right? So now we have our create user mutation done in our React application. But what else do we need? We want to be able to see every single user being displayed in our screen, right? So let's create a component for that. Let's go over here and actually create a file. Let me see, list of users. Let's call it list of users.tsx, and let's do an RFCE so that we import everything to our screen, as you can see. And inside of here, we're actually gonna make a query. You guys know that we have here in our API. I'm gonna open up here my API. We have a query called get all users. We just ran it, right? As you can see, it's the only query we have. It just returns every single user in the database. So how do we run a query? Well, I honestly want to run this query immediately when our API, like when we refresh the page, right? So how do we do that? So what we can do is we can first of all come to our GraphQL over here, and create the queries file, which we'd had before, but it was giving some errors. So queries.ts, we're going to do something very similar to mutation. We're going to actually just copy this and paste it over here. But instead of actually passing here a mutation, and also instead of calling it create user, let's call it get all users, like this. Get all users, and let's change this because it's going to be completely different. It's actually just going to be inside of here, we're going to say query, the name of the query. So let's go to our API. We can see that we called it we called get all users like this. We called it a function like this. So we can just come out over here and say query get all users, then pass here the name of the query again, which is get all users, and whatever we want to grab from that query. So I want to grab the name and the username. I don't want to grab the passwords because like no website wants to know the password, like want to display the password of their users. So we just want to get the name and the username, but this just shows the flexibility of using GraphQL. You can literally choose what you want to get from this request over here. So we're going to just get the name and the username, and that's fine. Let's save this, and now let's come to our list of queries, and let's import this query at the top here. So import from /GraphQL/queries. Let's import get all users like this. And then inside of here, we also want to import something from Apollo client. We want to import the use query hook from Apollo client. Let me just say Apollo client, and let's import the use query hook. So what is the use query hook? Similar to the use mutation, use query is actually a hook which whenever you load this page, whenever you refresh or re-render this page, it's going to execute a query that we passed inside of it, and it's just going to load the data. Very simple. It is used to execute queries without you needing to like click a button or anything like that. So that's what we need for now. Let's come here and let's actually tell our query, like call the hook by saying const, and then saying something like let me just destructure this and set it equal to use query like this, and then we can pass inside of here the name of the query. So the name of the query is get all users, and from here we can actually grab the data. We can grab again error. You can get loading if you want to. Loading is just a boolean asking if the data is still loading, like if you're still receiving the data. So that's actually really nice if you want to create like a scroll bar or like a loading bar, but we won't be doing that for now. We're only grabbing data, to be honest. I don't even care that much about the error. I just want to see the data that we receive from this query. So what do we do with this data? Well, for now, let's actually just test to see if something is happening. Let's do like if data, then we want to console log the data, something like this. Let's check to see if this is working. I want to grab this in my app.tsx and say list of users, and let's test to see if this works. If I refresh my page, let's see if it console logs anything, and as you can see, it console logged an object containing get all users, which is the name of the request, and inside of it, it contained an array with two users, which is exactly what we wanted, right? It's working, our query is working, we're receiving an array of users. But let's think about this. The data is actually an object, and inside of it, it has a property called get all users. So if you want to display that users in our screen, we have to do something similar to this. We have to obviously ask, okay, we only want to do this if data has arrived, because we don't know how long it's going to take for the data to arrive. So let's come over here and say, well, if data, we can just do it like this, if data, then I want to basically just say, okay, I want to grab the data dot get all users, then map through that list like this, map through that list, and obviously I'm going to grab user inside of here, and for each element in the list we just want to return a div saying something like and let me just close this, saying something like, I don't know, for now I just want to display the user dot name and also maybe the username, something like this. So I'm just going to divide them like this and say user dot username. Let's see if this works. Let's go to our page and let's refresh our page. We obviously have some errors. It says parameter user implicitly has an any type. So because we're using TypeScript, we obviously need to determine like interfaces and all that kind of stuff. But to do a quick fix, you can just say any, which obviously is counterintuitive, but that's fine. You can see that it is actually displaying our users in our screen, because what is happening here is we get all the data. The data is an object. We ask, okay, only if the data has been available, if the data arrived, we want to check for this and get the data, then get the property inside of the data, which is an object called getAllUsers, then map through each one of those users and just return a div saying, like, just showing the username and the password. Oh, and the name, right? So it's working, as you can see. Let me try adding someone else, like Jack, Jack123, and then the password is 123456. Create user. Let's refresh the page. You can see that the user appears in our screen. Now, what else do we have to do? Well, think about this. We want to be able to edit the password for a user, so we might want to do that in the next video. And we also need to be able to delete each user. So actually, both of those features will come in the next video, because I don't want the videos to be really long. However, this is basically it for this video right here. The last video will be the next one, where we're just going to implement the update and delete in our React application. But you can see that we already made so much progress, because I remember when I started learning GraphQL, it was the hardest thing to kind of just connect everything I was doing, connect my API to my React client, and I'm really glad that I was able to make these videos, so I can like try to help any of you guys who are also struggling, similar to how I struggled when I started learning GraphQL. So that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe, because I'm posting 3 times a week, and it's been a whole lot of work, but I've been really enjoying posting these videos, and the support you guys give me is like unbelievable. So I really appreciate the support, and yeah, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.